Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm your host. And we have a brand new topic today, and it's a really good one, actually. It's from startup to enterprise, preserving culture amid acquisition. It's actually a pretty interesting story, and it's something that I've been a part of, several times in my career, which it can be both fun and not fun. This podcast is just all about work, HR, world of work, HR tech, and we have different types of people on the show, all the way from HR leaders to tech experts from all over North America. And these episodes live on our website, GoDailyHR.com, and also on our YouTube channel. So if you're a video person like me, following all these different channels, you can go but directly. And obviously, we always want to encourage people just to share their thoughts and comments. So this one, once again, is from startup to enterprise, and it's really a story of a small Toronto-based tech company, about 70 employees or so, but just got acquired, and they've been gobbled up by a 70,000 person organization, going from 70 to 70,000. And so Shawna Stewart is going to help us sort of break it all down. But I just wanted to just share just a couple of things, because this is always a major issue. Whenever a startup or a smaller, tech company, I guess, start and then start to grow, scale, culture is always really at the heart of what they do, because it's such a small group of people. And they typically, this is, sort of a generalization, but they pride themselves on a close-knit, family-oriented, innovative, dynamic culture. There's a whole bunch of other things too, but that's probably the high level similarity. But then when a small company gets acquired by a massive, global enterprise, which happens a lot, there's a real risk of that culture that they've worked so hard to build and, cultivate over time. It just gets lost or gets watered down. And that's the real challenge. And I think every startup sort of goes through that process. The second point, that I want to make is something that I'm calling integration versus identity. So what that means is the challenge just isn't about adapting to a new structure. It's about finding ways to actually integrate, into the larger organization, while still keeping what made that startup special. And so how do you balance these two forces? Because obviously they're not complementary always. They tend to compete, going from a 70-person company, how they operate, versus a 70,000 person mammoth is very, very different. And I've worked in both, and I can tell it's very, very different. But but it's not about me. So we're here. I want to welcome Shawna Stewart. Shawna is based in Toronto, and I'm going to let her do all of the talking. And so, Shawna, I just want to thank you for being here.
So where do I begin? With that segue, there's a lot to unpack in that, but I think, if I take the leadership lens, if you're fortunate enough to be on the, a core team when acquisition is on the table, you have the ability to influence what you will be like on the other side, right? In a situation where it's a strategic acquisition, especially, in a startup that is highly sought after, you have a little bit of say into how you want to operate when you do, get to the other side of the acquisition. So you do your best to try to say, I'd like the team to stay together for at least, 12 to 18 months, right? Don't disperse everyone everywhere. We want to keep our brand, or, we're okay with rebranding, but we want to keep the way that we work, intact in terms of even just sprint cycles or development cycles, for the first little bit, just to make sure the team isn't shocked coming out on the other side, or culture shocked coming out on the other side. Yeah. So I think there's a little bit of negotiation has to go into the pre-sale. And if you're, an HR leader who's able to be part of those conversations, or at least gets to weigh in with, your founders or whoever's part of that sale conversation, these are things that you can bring to the table and say, if you want people to stay and be retained on the other side, or aside from, individual compensation or, whatever equity might come out of it, there are some cultural aspects of that to consider, if you care about that stuff, which usually startups
sure.
for your point.
So just a question about that, because obviously I'm very, very cognizant that I don't want to ask you any questions that might sort of breach some privacy. Obviously, you're sort of going through this right now. But I guess what can you sort of tell us is the biggest challenge right now that you're facing with respect to keeping that culture that you work so hard to cultivate? And by the way, what's your title? VP of HR?
That's a great question, Jeff.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it's still being finalized, believe it or
Oh,
not.
the new title is being
Yeah,
finalized. Okay.
so you come in on the other side and you focus on integration, especially when you're with a core team, leadership teams specifically, and so you are lumped into an operations kind of domain. But I would say right now I'm pretty much heading up product just because that's where the gap was, and has been coming on the other side. But I've always got that HR hat on. Can't take that HR hat off, Jeff. So that's to answer your questions. Undetermined, but determined.
Undetermined. But your previous role at Rails was
VP people and operations.
and operations. Okay, so very cool. That's actually related. It's an that's another topic actually that we are are going to be exploring. Is that more and more heads of HR are doing a dual both HR, but also operations as well, which is really interesting. Anyway, so that's really interesting. So what would be the biggest sort of challenge right now that you're facing, that you're seeing in this sort of transition with trying to maintain that culture?
For right now, I think because we've been so heavily involved in getting acquainted with how the process is for everything, we've been
Right.
hyper focused on learning, right? We've been hyper focused on, where do we need to show up? What meetings do we need to be a part of? How do we get our JIRA to talk to their JIRA? How do we get, our tools migrated? How do we ask for help? How do we ask for resources, right? So there's been a lot of learning or onboarding, I would say. So that I think has distracted us from keeping focus on our culture, keeping focus on how we connect with one another. It got to a point where things were very transactional with the team. And so, we're just trying to survive in a lot of ways. But I think we're in a good place now. We've come out on the other side of some planning. We've come out on the other side of understanding, where we sit from a departmental standpoint. And so now we can actually get back into doing social events and get back into how we want to work together and, what one-on-ones we want to have. How do we want to conduct our stand-ups and, make sure that we have some sort of social humanized portion of our day come out. And so that's where we've been really trying to heighten that up. And I've been working with the team closely on trying to make sure that they could get that humanized experience back because we work remotely as well.
And that actually segues into my next question, really, which was about, like overall experience, because ultimately, as a small company, the biggest thing that you can possibly do is to make sure that the actual employee experience is awesome, because it's really difficult for you to compete with a larger organization that have lots of money in deep pockets. So how you kind of talked about this, but obviously one of the reasons why that your employees in the startup organization loved working there probably was because they felt connected to the organization and the values and the experience. So how are you making sure that the employees still feel connected?
Yes, I love that question, right? Because we won awards, right? We were top workplaces in Canada, and
Oh, okay.
for our culture. And so, wanting to keep the team together was number one, right? Because if you start to see people leaving, then, that can disrupt how you feel about your stability. So that was key. But, making sure that we still had our channels, right? We've moved from Slack over to, Microsoft Teams, and making sure the team was acquainted with how that works and trying to build workflows that, were kind of similar to what we had before. We're doing surveys again, pulse checks, and it's not necessarily my job anymore to be HR or be the head of people anymore, but it's something that's important to me and it's still part of the fiber of my being. And
Right.
so, bringing those systems into how we work has been important, right? Because it's not just something that was happening. It was like we built in these pulse checks, we built in get to know you surveys, we built in, social events and at town halls, right? Strategy meetings. We're doing a hack day this week, right? So,
Oh, no.
that's not something that the larger org had sanctioned necessarily, but I went to the powers that be and said, this is why you acquired us, because we had
That's right.
startup mentality and we were scrappy, and we really had innovative mindset. And so I want to tap into that with my team, especially now that we're in this ecosystem. What does our product look like now, right, with the distribution of this big org and all the resources that we have at our disposal?
There's a lot of really benefits actually with from the big company. Over time it'll lose its sights on what makes them really special, and the smaller company has that ability to be really nimble and creative. So I've seen a lot of really interesting things happen where the small organization gets in there and actually influences some of the things that the larger one's doing, which is really interesting because obviously in this context, you're a 70 person company getting gobbled up by a 70,000 person company, which is like a mid-sized town, right? So, but the other issue that I just wanted to just ask you about is around leadership, because obviously when you're a startup, it's founded by a group of people, one person, two, three, whatever, and then you end up building your, leadership team. So there's a lot of, domain there in terms of responsibility and accountability. Obviously, when you get acquired, that changes, right? So those leaders are not really the head leaders anymore. So that can be a really big issue. So what are you doing, or what have you seen happen to ensure that the leadership team of Rails, continue to have that voice and is able to actually influence the larger organization?
Yeah, the best advice I can give to any leadership team that gets acquired, keep your leadership syncs, right? Even if you are dispersed, keep your leadership syncs. Meet once a week if you can, just to see what are you hearing, what are you learning, it's important to have that connectivity. It's important for the team to know that you're all on the same page and that you're advocating for them. I also think, for us, we've kept like our Ask Me Anything sessions that we had bi-weekly before. So the team still comes together and still communicates and says, hey, I have a question about how this works, right? And we've now incorporated people from the larger org into what we are doing, and so we're introducing them to a little bit of how we used to run things as a startup and how connected we were with one another. So bringing them into the fold has been really powerful because it gives them a platform. They can ask their questions, they can say what's bothering them about process, or say what's getting in their way. And at that point I can take those back, or the leadership team can take those back to whoever they're working with to try to influence making changes. Because at the end of the day, the organization wants the same thing as every organization. They want to be successful. They want to be productive. They want to make money, right? So what can we do to get people out of their own way? The only way we know that they're in their own way is if we talk to them. So really making sure that those lines of communication are still intact. Keep that standing meeting. Don't lose sight of it. And that, I think, will make a big difference when you're on the other side of the acquisition.
So those are great points. I mean, it's a really delicate balance because one of your goals is to sort of integrate, right? And I've seen situations where the actual acquired, company tries to keep it going, as if they're separate, for too long, right? And it starts to become, you start to see some fractures there. So I think, while it's very important to have that group mindset, I think it's really important to be mindful of the larger picture, which is really difficult to do. So I'm going to, assume that you've learned a lot throughout this process, because and if you say no, then you're lying. So looking back at this entire process, since the start, is there one thing that kind of jumps out to you that you've learned, that you would want to share with other startup HR leaders, going through a similar transition, or maybe going through something like in the near future?
Yes, I mean, this is my second time going through an acquisition where I've been part of core leadership. So I learned a lot from the first time that I applied to this time. And I think it's advice I wish I had prior. So I'll share my tips there. But one thing I think is important for your broader team, don't communicate too early in an acquisition process. I love the idea of being transparent. I love the idea of, getting people excited about an acquisition, but it can take a long time to finalize. And it does put people in a limbo state if they don't know when is it going to happen. So my advice would be, socialize. socialize the idea that we may be purchased. But, keep it kind of high level, right? When you're ready to move in that direction and, you're getting close to a close date, that's when it's time to really say, okay, this is what's going to happen. We've advocated for you in these ways, and here are the details, because people will want to know that information. And, having seen it on both sides where it's been communicated too early versus communicated a little bit closer to when it happened, I think it definitely was received better. And the limbo state isn't as uncomfortable for people, right? To say, when is it going to happen? What date? What do I leave? Is it truly going to happen? Right. So I think just, from a transparency standpoint, there are different ways to kind of communicate that keeps people excited and intrigued, but, not too hyper focused on it.
Yeah, I think that is, excellent advice, because I think, because if you're going to tell somebody something and they start asking you questions and you can't answer anything, that's going to leave even a darker black cloud over you, because people, obviously, nowadays, they care about their jobs, right? And so, do I have to go look? Do I have to do something? And obviously nowadays, with the financial cost of living is so high, it's even more sensitive. So that is, a really excellent advice. If listeners to this episode can learn just one thing about anything that we talked about, so what is that one thing?
What is that one thing? I think if I'm, widely communicating with a lot of founders, widely communicating with a lot of head of people who are working with founders closely, and especially in the tech startup space and everything like that, acquisitions do happen. Don't listen to the stats. Don't listen to, the probability. Focus on what you do and what you bring to the market. Just keep going, and disrupt as much as possible, right? If you think things are kind of feeling comfortable, don't get complacent. Disrupt it. Do a hack day, get your team involved, engineers, product people, anybody, because there are great insights from your team on the ground level that can really shake things up. Might be a new revenue stream for you. Having gone through 2 exits now, I've seen the dark side of the moon and thought, hey, things are not going to go well, going from 70 to 30 to, 50 to, the ebbs and flows and the rifts, but, coming out on the other side, it can happen, right? And so
Definitely.
Think about it from the perspective of, what can we do to disrupt in this market, and you'll be fine.
Fantastic advice. So thank you very much, Shawna, for being here. This is the Unmuted Podcast. We talk about all things about a world of work, HR tech, and we drop new episodes every Thursday morning. The episodes live on our website, and also on our YouTube channel. Drop a like, drop a comment. We want to hear from you. So once again, Shawna, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.